So, the flashback has finally concluded, and let me just say that there is a lot about this episode that I love that also made me very emotional. So, I'm just gonna jump right into it because, hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Andrew, and I'm here to do my breakdown and review for My Hero Academia Vigilantes, Season 2, Episode 8. Like I said, there's a lot that was actually changed and added in this episode, so I'm going to go over a lot of stuff. And before we get into it proper, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I talk about My Hero, anime related stuff, and if that's something that you're interested in, why not subscribe? And without the way, let's dive right into the episode. And to start off, the episode is titled A Sky with No Rain Left, which takes its name from manga chapter 65. As well as for this episode, the chapter this episode was named after was actually initially titled Angular Hero, but was amended for the volume release. And when it comes to this episode, it covers material from chapters 63, 64, as well as chapter 65. However, the anime does not adapt a few panels from chapter 63, as well as it doesn't adapt panels from 65, as well as we skip pages 2 to 3 in chapter 65. So with that in mind, there is a lot that actually goes on in this episode that kind of deviates from what we got in the manga, and you'll see what that is very soon. Because, very much like in the manga, the episode begins with Sensoji, aka Mr. Blaster, as well as Yamada, aka Present Mike, during their work study on their way to fight the frog villain that we saw from last episode, Garvey. They're doing it alongside their hero mentors, the Blaster Union. What's interesting about this moment is that we do have a small change where in the anime, the Blaster Union approaches Garvey from the side, while in the manga, we see that they are actually approaching from above. And you can clearly see the differences because of how we get to see the characters of Yamada and Sensoji, and how in the anime we see that the other members are above them. However, in the manga, Sensoji and Yamada are above the Buster Union, which implies that they're coming more from above than they are from the side. But whether or not they're coming from above or below does not matter, because as they begin their attack, we see that the anime does give everyone a unique look to their attacks, more in the anime versus the manga, where most of the attacks are just generic energy blasts. And how when we see Garvey actually eating the attacks, quite literally as well, anime also shows the aftermath of the attack, which is a big explosion, which is actually absent from the manga. Also, I'm interjecting here because there's something that I didn't realize while editing the video. And that is that in the Buster Union's first scene, all of the dialogue from the official members is exclusively coming from Buku Komi in the anime, implying that he was the team's captain at the time. So that's an interesting change that the anime made from the manga. And like I said, these are going to be a few examples of the changes that are being made throughout this episode. However, this episode is a little bit different from the previous episodes that we've had in this season, because this anime episode deviates from the norm, as we actually do not get the opening for this episode, as we jump right into the title card and cut over to Aizawa and Shirokumo on their hero patrol. And from here, we see, very much like in the manga, how they help and entertain some preschoolers, as well as we have the conversation from the manga in the anime about how Aizawa needs to be a little bit more confident in himself, as well as the idea from Shirokumo that he would make for a good teacher, could work very well with kids, as we see him save a little girl from falling off the cloud. And what's very important about this conversation to this entire flashback is, if you remember correctly, what started off the flashback for the most part is Aizawa rejecting the call to be a teacher from his friend Kayama, aka Midnight, and how most likely his reaction stems from this conversation with Oboro, as well as the events that will follow, which we will get to shortly. But it is from here where the sky begins to darken, as Aizawa is alerted to the villain Garvey being in their area. And we begin to get a better understanding of what type of criminal Garvey is. But with this in mind though, we also get the reveal in this moment that Yamada and his group were also overpowered and eventually defeated by Garvey. But it is from here where the anime does cut some material that appeared in the manga. For instance, the anime cuts a few panels from the manga, but those cuts are compensated by the anime adding in more of Garvey doing a lot more destruction, as well as the anime depicting it in a better scale and clarity with the quirks that he was using that he got from Yamada and the rest of the heroes. And an example of this is how Garvey's redirected attacks are shown to be a lot more destructive in the anime, such as during his assault against his Purple Highness, where one of the lasers he fires being so strong that it's able to slice through 2 buildings. So it's changes to the anime like this that really elevates this episode to be greatness, and we haven't even gotten to what makes this episode great. Because, very similar to what we got in the manga, we see Aizawa and Oboro trying their best to rescue the kids as his Purple Highness tries to act as a distraction. And when we begin to see the start of the action between Aizawa as well as this Garvey villain, we see that the anime changes the location of where the fight is to be closer to some warehouses than regular taller buildings in the city. This is seen as his Purple Highness is shot into the warehouse in the anime, while in the manga it seems to be in a regular building. As well as we get very much similar scenes of rubble falling and almost hitting the kids, but luckily enough, Oboro is able to use his clouds to protect him. However, something that is different between the anime and the manga is how Oboro is actually characterized, or more specifically visualized in this sequence. Because in the manga, we clearly see the rock smash and slam into Oboro's head. However, in the anime, they make it a very quick shot where if you aren't looking for it or don't pause it at that right time, you don't see exactly what happens. Which is very interesting because while yes, it's still adapting the material that we got from the manga, the fact that they made it extremely quick and barely apparent in the episode could make people come to the conclusion that Oboro wasn't heavily damaged and was just stuck under the rock, which leads to what we get very much like in the manga and the anime of the pep talk that he gives Aizawa, which we will later learn was all in Aizawa's head. So this slight adaptation can really change the feel and flow of the episode in a very different way from what we got in the manga. But I think from here is where I really want to dive into the action between Aizawa and Garvey. Because very much like in the manga, in this moment, Aizawa is unable to really truly figure out how to fight against Garvey. But thanks to the encouragement of quote-unquote Oboro, he's able to eventually fight back. And this is where we get the anime adapting the fight between Aizawa and Garvey, and how the anime adds a lot more action to this scene, from Aizawa swinging around more in the anime, to even showing more clearly when he's using his erasure, as well as just showing more scenes of him climbing and maneuvering on the back of Garvey, as well as rearranging a few scenes, such as the eye stab coming sooner in the anime than what we got in the manga. And this entire action sequence was done immaculately. Even when Garvey is defeated by swallowing his own warts and Aizawa dismissing his erasure, which is more clearly depicted in the anime than the manga, the anime clearly shows all of the attacks that he absorbed and how they are all different and how they all are reacting and exploding in that final attack before he falls to the ground. Really just showing how the animators, even with the changes that they made earlier on, were still able to carry them on into later scenes to make them have a little bit more impact and continuity between the scenes in the anime in comparison to what we got in the manga, which was a lot more generic. And what's even better is with the defeat of Garvey by Aizawa and how many of the other heroes viewed it as him doing it on his own, Aizawa believes that he had the help of Shiro Kumo Oboro, but it is revealed to him that Oboro died, and that the device that Oboro used to communicate through was actually broken the entire time, and how very much Aizawa was able to do this on his own because he imagined what Oboro would be saying to him in this moment, even though at this moment he was already dead. And what makes this scene hit even more is probably in combination to the fact of how we spent a few episodes with all of these characters, Kayama, Yamada, as well as Sensoji and Aizawa, and how we got to see their friendship in true blue fashion, which makes the death of Oboro, even with the short amount of time that we spent with him, hurt even more. From the animation to the sepia tone coloring to the relationships being built over the past few episodes, all of that comes together to make this hit so hard that it almost made me cry watching it, even though I knew exactly what was going to happen. Also, something else that I missed in this very emotional scene while editing is that when Shota is recalling the moments he spent with Oboro while mourning his death, the scenes are actually taken from chapter 254 and 255 from the main series instead of scenes from Vigilantes, which is most likely done to emphasize that this is a canon event in My Hero Academia, even though it's coming from a spin-off series. So it's good that they're actually tying in the canons together in this moment through this very emotional scene. And how the scene caps off with Aizawa realizing that his friend is dead, and Aizawa and Yamada mourning in the only way that they know how. And like I said, we've only known Oboro for a total of around 10 to less chapters over the entire series. So even if you read My Hero Academia proper and know who Oboro is in the main series, this is still going to hit just as hard, if not harder, than someone who had no information about it whatsoever. Now that we've brought up finally that Oboro was the student that dies in this entire scene, let's go over why this scene and this episode is important to the canon of My Hero Academia. Because, fun fact, when it comes to what chapter this episode is based off of, the reveal of Oboro's death in chapter 64, as well as bleeding into the next chapter in this flashback, this chapter this episode is based off of was released both around Aizawa's birthday, November 8th, as well as 1 month before the reveal that Oboro was Kurogiri the entire time. So this is very interesting due to the fact that as Vigilantes the manga was going on with My Hero Academia, we get the reveal of Oboro's flashback and then the reveal of Kurogiri. However, because the anime has concluded, we actually get this reveal flipped. So we know who Oboro is in the anime, so we know who Kurogiri and Oboro is in the main story prior to this anime revealing the backstory of Oboro, Aizawa, and Yamada. So it's very funny that due to how the timeline works out, both of these incidences happen in flipped ways. But yeah, now that we've gone over the Oboro, let's go more into speaking more on Aizawa, because this is where we start getting more into material from chapter 65. And now speaking on Aizawa, this is where we get a lot of material that was in chapter 65 that was cut from the anime. Because as we jump to a year later, this is where we are shown Aizawa pushing himself to his limits, as it reveals that he is going to be going independent on his own after graduation. This is where a lot of the small additions and changes to this material between the anime and the manga can be seen. For instance, when the teachers are discussing about how Aizawa is doing in his first year, the anime cuts some scenes showing Shota throughout his third year in high school, which includes another fight between Sensoji, which is a shame due to it showing a lot of development from these 2 pages of Sensoji and how he sees Aizawa after the incident with Oboro, and how he gains a lot more respect for Aizawa, even though he doesn't necessarily say it straightforwardly. But we also get moments of him taking a nap in class as the students are discussing the sports festival, which is characterizing him a lot more, showing that he is not really much caring about school because he already knows what he's going to be doing after graduation, so he's just doing the bare minimum to get by. As well as the anime does cut the scene of Shoto asking his teachers to use the gym for solo training. However, we still do see that solo training and how he's pushing his body to the limits, even to the point of him bleeding, as well as we do have Yamada still watching over him, just showing how much the death of Oboro affected both of them, but Aizawa a lot more, really just showing how friendly they still are because Yamada is still watching over Aizawa in the same fashion that Oboro would have as well. Even after that, we do still have the conversation with Aizawa and his teacher, once again cutting to graduation, where we get a few more changes and cuts. One major change is that in the manga, the students are actually dressed up in their hero costumes. However, in the anime, they're in their regular uniform. This makes sense, however, because we are revealed in the epilogue of My Hero Academia what the graduation of the third years look like, and it makes sense the anime will change this from the manga to be more consistent with the main series manga and new information that we got from the epilogue of My Hero Academia. And this leads to even more cut scenes as well as some additions. For example, in the anime, we actually get the extended version of the graduation sequence by showing Aizawa silently walking through the crowd before Yamada calls out to him. However, in the manga, Shota isn't even seen at the graduation before he uses erasure on Yamada, which is something that we get clearly shown in the anime, and it's a little bit more ambiguous in the manga. But alongside that, we do get a change, as I said before, where he's not shown in his hero costume as he is in the manga. However, the anime is able to coincide and merge them together by showing him going off in his school uniform, but still wearing the goggles around his neck, giving the same vibe that as soon as graduation ended, he was immediately going to go into hero work. But along with that change, there's also a few more cuts that were made from the manga. Because in the manga, the other students during this graduation moment suggest taking a class photo before Yamada tries to flag down Aizawa to join them. As well as there is a final addition that the anime does by showing the ribbon falling, similar to the manga, but we actually see the ribbon hit the ground in more detail in the anime, as we have added scenes of the rain beginning to fall as the ribbon is on the ground, which would be a great transition into the montage of Aizawa doing his heroic work during his first few years as a hero. And this is where we get a little bit more additions as well, because very much like in the manga, we see the montage from Aizawa fighting against what we assume was his first set of villains up until he meets the vigilantes of Naruhata. But the anime does add a lot more images to the montage, which includes him fighting and capturing more villains, seeing him training more in the anime, as well as we get more scenes in the anime of him sleeping, as well as getting angry while he's on the phone. And how the anime also extends the sequence where he meets the vigilantes by showing some reused scenes that we would have seen within the first few episodes of Vigilantes. And this just really just shows and adds to the idea that after graduation, Aizawa hasn't healed from the death of Oboro, and that he's trying to be a loner, even though the entire point of the first part of the flashback is that he should be working together more as a team. Eventually, as we get towards the end of the episode, as this is where the flashback ends, Aizawa and Koichi eventually realize that the rain has gone as they go over to meet the Hotta brothers, as it's here where we get a few more changes and subtractions between the anime and the manga. For one change is that after we get Koichi reintroducing himself to the Octo Squid man named Ikajiro Tokobe, we have the anime actually removing the Hotta brothers as well as Kirihito's lines greeting Aizawa, and with those greetings, they also explain why they're actually moving the table outside, because they have a lot more bigger people inside of their store. However, the anime also does some rearranging as well, especially when it comes to the scene when Tokobe asks about the cat after the Hotta brothers and Kirihito bring up the cafe in the anime, while in the manga, this scene happened before the Hotta brothers and Kirihito bring up the cafe idea and how they're going to convert the old warehouse lot into a cafe where they can have a cafe with people who have quirks that makes their body a lot bigger than normal. So it's cool that they were able to rearrange it and make it make sense for the anime, but we also have some stuff that was cut. Because when Ichiro brings up the cafe, the anime cuts the dialogue of him explaining where the funding for the cafe will come from, which comes from the money that they got from the villain damage insurance, as well as the welfare subsidies that Kirihito and Takobe were getting. And what was also cut is the line of dialogue from Ikajiro bringing up that he has earned his chef's license, and it also excludes him talking about the bathroom doors with Kirihito. And those are pretty much the final subtractions that we have for the episode until we reach the end. And the episode begins to come to an end, and we don't get that many more changes except for a few, as we have the gang talking about who and how the cat will be taken care of, as Aizawa realizes that the scene that he's seeing with them right now is very similar to a conversation that he had with Oboro, Kayama, and Yamada over sushi. You know, the cat, not actual sushi. And how their plans were to work together to keep sushi in one location, and how the plans of the Hotta brothers as well as Koichi also includes Aizawa, very much like it was in the flashback, which eventually allows for Aizawa to begin to see the sun, which is more metaphor for him moving forward and not staying in the metaphorical darkness anymore, which allows him to keep moving forward and eventually accept the offer by Kayama to be a teacher. That is pretty much where the episode ends, but there are a few more changes that I want to bring up between the anime and the manga. For instance, we have in the anime that Aizawa is alerted to a message from Midnight before we actually see it in both the anime and the manga. We get that notification in the anime, but we also have the anime cut a line of dialogue from the manga that confirms that he's actually leaving town, which is directly implying that he will accept the teaching job at UA alongside his friends Yamada and Kayama. However, the anime does keep the line where he does say that he will try and visit them and the cats, with the episode actually ending with a unique ending showcase of the events of the School Days arc in a slideshow manner. And yeah, that's pretty much this episode of My Hero Academia Vigilantes. And honestly, probably the best episode of the entire season, because it had great action, great emotional beats, as well as great character development moments. And while obviously with some of the cut content could have made this episode a little bit better, it's pretty much hard to add on to something that I view as a nearly perfect episode. But hey, that's just my thoughts of the episode. So let me ask you this. How did you feel about the episode? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? How do you feel about Aizawa's flashback? And do you think that it would have been better if it was in the main series? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!